even as you're doing cold cases now, your memory can still kick back because you had mentioned that these smells come back from old cases.
Yeah. So I found that interesting because it's also what you talk about when you do trauma-based interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
What did you smell? What did you hear? And you think about your memories. They're usually associated with a smell, a sound, a sight sometimes. So I'm looking at one of the old cold cases, which had a really nasty inside scene. There's blood everywhere, and you could tell they've been dead for a couple days. And what's this particular case we're talking about just came back. I could smell her. I could smell the house. I could feel the texture. You know, when you have the iron in the blood that you're eating when you're inside the house, because a lot of times we did not have masks for a while. So that just all flooded back when I was watching these pictures. I'm like, wow, that's just fascinating. I could taste it and like needed a shower. It's just really bizarre to me that I had the taste and I had to go get something to kind of take the taste out.
Can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Yep, I'm Karl Noah, and I am a retired investigations lieutenant from the Bonneville County Sheriff's Office, and currently got hired to be a contractor with ISP Saki Group, so we work cold cases right now across the state of Idaho.
Okay, so maybe we start there with the cold case. What are you doing? You retired. You basically got offered this position. So what are you working on?
So there's two parts to this that I take care of, and there's two purpose areas. One's purpose area 4, which is cold case sexual assaults, and then there's purpose area 6, which is all homicides, missing person cases with a foul play kind of indication, and UHRs are unidentified human remains. And my particular area is Southeast Idaho because this is where I am. So I take care of ISP region 5 and 6. And we go to the agencies and ask what cold cases they might have and how we can help them. And very specifically, what the grants are for is forensic investigative genetic genealogy. So if they have any evidence that's still around, we start looking at the case as a whole. What do you have? What can we send to the lab? And what can we help with? Because as you know, more and more cold cases are getting solved with FIGG. So that's the biggest.
What's FIGG? Just so
forensic investigative genetic genealogy.
How receptive when you reach out to these departments? How receptive are they to have you guys help them?
For the most part, very receptive on that, because I am one of the ones who got approached to help write a letter to get the grants for the state. Matthew Gammett's idea to come across and get this unit going.
And Matthew Gammett is the laboratory director for Idaho.
Yes.
Okay.
Idaho State.
Okay.
Forensic Service Laboratory Director. Basically, so he got these grants and to help with that and to go around. So they're receptive, and we also just spread the word and saying we're here and we're allowed to help in any way that they see fit. They don't help, we don't help. If we can take it from the beginning or whatever, we'll help them do that.
Okay. Okay, before I forget, tell me about so your girlfriend runs for the audience, for the true crime junkies out there. She runs a kind of an organization here. Can you tell me about that?
Crystal Douglas, my girlfriend, currently runs Idaho Cold Cases.
Okay.
So she's built a Facebook page called Idaho Cold Cases, which has all the cold cases, the missings, the UHRs, the homicides that have not been solved in the state of Idaho from way back when to like most current times on her first Facebook page. And she'll get relatives that will post to her and say, what about this? And give her clues. And she just has all that built up. So it's like almost another database in my mind to help with the state of Idaho. If you go to her page, a lot of times it matches the missing clearinghouse person cases, matches what's in NamUs, and matches maybe what's in NCMEC a little bit. And just so it's all kind of in one place.
Okay. So for the audience, I will make sure that I put the Facebook page a link in the description of this video so you can locate this, because I think it's very, very fascinating. Okay, so one of the reasons that I'm interviewing you is you were a referral to me from another detective, and one of the reasons was you have a very, very fascinating background. So the last couple interviews I've done, I've asked this question because there's a perception out there that cops are dumb jocks, and that's why you become a police officer. So tell me a little bit about you growing up. What did you end up doing before you became a cop? And was there always, even though you ended up doing something else, was there always something in your mind that you wanted to go into law enforcement?
Okay, yeah. So I grew up actually I was born in the Bronx. So then my parents moved to what we call upstate New York, across the river from West Point, New York. Very small community, very much like here in Idaho Falls. I could literally hunt and fish out my back door. But at that time, my uncle was a cop, my cousin was a cop, and two of my other cousins were firefighters. So something I enjoyed talking to my uncle and my cousin about. There's funny stories about him like getting stuck in a window once. That was hilarious. And doing things like that. And then as I grew up, it's always fascinated me. I liked the New York State Troopers and thought about potentially being a New York State Trooper. My mom was really insistent that I go to college. So when I went to college, for some reason I chose marine biology. I still can't figure out why I chose marine biology. I really don't like being underwater, but that's something I started in. And they did have a law enforcement program, so I waffled back and forth a little bit. But as you take your prereqs, I am very good in math and very good in chemistry. Put the two together, you get chemical engineering. So I went to college and got my bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. I graduated in 86, which is when 83, when oil industry kind of wasn't doing well. So basically half our class was unemployed. So I applied to grad school, actually, and looked for what we call biochemical engineering. It was a newer field at the time. It's basically how your pharmaceuticals are made. We would consider biochemical engineering. So a little more chemistry or biology in there. So I went to grad school for biochemical engineering, got my master's degree in that. And then one of my classmates at the time lived up in the Idaho Falls area, and I had a job at the Idaho National Lab for the summer. He finally got his stipend in. I was done. So we literally kind of switched places. I called who he was going to work for. They said, yeah, come work for me for the summer. So I came out to Idaho Falls and had a summer gig for the biotechnology group at the Idaho National Lab. That turned into a postmaster's and then turned into a 17-year career working at the biotechnology lab in the Idaho National Laboratory system.
Okay, so let me ask you this. What specifically did you do? Can you talk about what you did at the...
Yep. So basically within the biotechnology group, we were more emphasized in environmental cleanup type of work. I specifically worked on acid mine drainage cleanup, desulfurization of coal, biohydrometallurgy, which is a big word for saying mining with bacteria to produce copper and gold, which has already happened naturally. We just try to make it a little faster and help clean up the mine sites. So that's a lot of what we did. And I was one of the few engineers in the group, was mostly biologists, biochemists. And inside that group, we also somewhat genetically manipulated DNA or bacteria to help do the job faster. So I got familiar with DNA techniques and things like that to put into the reactors that I would help build and do that. So that's that part.
Okay, so you're doing this job for 17 years. Is there always a lingering thought in your mind? Like, is it to the point where like, man, this job's okay, it's paying me well, but I'm not happy? Or is it, I'm
Yeah,
fascinated about law enforcement.
It got to that point for me. The research part, it might be a different project, but it's repetitive and just kind of doing the same thing. Do a lot of lit surveys and research, and then move on and do your research. But when I got divorced the first time, fortunately, got divorced, and my ex-wife told me, there's reserve programs out there. I've always thought about being in law enforcement. And back east, there was no such thing as reserve programs, more unionized back east. So I went and applied and got hired by the Shelley PD, which is a little funny story for me. Because I showed up there with my 3-year-old and my 1-year-old in my hand, say, you have reserve spots? And they, yeah, we do. Fill out the application. I did. And I got home and they called me like 6 o'clock that night, say, come down for a meeting. Starts at 7 and you'll have an interview. I'm like, oh my God. So I had to scramble and got a babysitter, went down, did the interview, said, yep, you're good to go. Went to my first meeting and I'm looking, mind you, I'm 36 at about that time frame. And there's these 20-year-olds in there and I'm looking at their faces. These are babies to me, 2 of my closer friends that started in Shelley with me as reserves and moved up. So that's what got me into reserving. And I did reserves from 1996 through 2000 and basically 3 when I got hired by Shelley PD. So let me see if I wanted to do it. And along the way, I did get offered a job by Shelley PD. Still divorced at the time, put pen to paper. Literally, it was eat or pay your rent. I couldn't do both. It was a very drastic pay cut. And then it happened, I got offered the job again, and that's when I was getting remarried. And at that time, my second wife, we talked about it, and she was very encouraging of, yeah, why don't you go do it? You'll be happier. I was honestly going to work pissed off when I was working as an engineer for a little time. I tried some other things. I tried adjusting my attitude, like they say to do. I tried to find other jobs within that. There was some security jobs I could have had, which were more as a scientist talking to the people who come back from overseas and make sure they're not being exploited. At that time, China, big, trade money for your secrets. But at that time, I had what's called an L clearance. It got dropped to a building access only because my lab didn't need it. And the other person had a Q clearance. So I didn't get that job. So at the same time frame, I'm getting this job to go for Shelley. So I went and took that and did that. I did part-time for Shelley too for a little bit before doing that. So for me, I got to know what it was going to be like. I really liked doing it. For me, it also was a good outlet of being divorced rather than doing stupid crap or nothing on a weekend. So the weekends I didn't have my kid, I was reserving. So I was putting in a good 800 to literally 1,000 hours a year reserving. And what was nice is working with Shelley PD in the Bingham County Sheriff's Office, which had a little bigger playground. You got to be called a level 1 reserve. So I was actually allowed to take a car and go handle calls by myself and do everything the cops would do, except not get paid. So that's the only difference for working those 2 agencies. I did that all for free. I had to buy my own vest, my own gun. Uniforms were provided, but all my duty gear and all that I bought, and it's just tax write-offs.
Did you know from the very beginning, though, once you started being a reserve officer, did you know, oh, I got to do this?
Yeah, when I started reserving, I really liked it. There was a lot of reasons for doing it. 1, it was closer knit. 2, it's as the physical side. I've always liked sports and good at sports, and I liked working outside more than sitting at a desk. So it was good for me to do that. I really enjoyed it and felt, in a way, relaxed, but also a little more hyped up because you got to watch your background and just learned more of how everything that they had to know struck me as odd for the state of Idaho. I came from New York. New York, in my opinion, the cops are treated as it's a profession. You usually have to have a degree back there, or did, to get into it. Here, high school diploma, you can become a cop. The amount of stuff you have to know, the liability that's on you, the decisions you have to make, the sense of responsibility that I got from doing that job versus my engineering job, which, yes, I mean, I'm working for a government lab, so there was responsibility there, but I felt more responsibility there and career fulfillment doing that than I ever did my engineering job. So when the job finally came open, and I wanted to make sure it was good with my wife, because this is a 50% pay cut. And now you're working those odd hours, you're working the weekends, you're working the holidays, and you're not going to be as home. My kids were still not even teenagers yet. So I knew that's going to be missing them as much, and making sure that's okay with the ex too, make sure all that fits. And where everybody said yes, thankfully, that was nice. So that's what started my career. So
Yeah, and clearly it wasn't a money thing, because you were
No.
making a lot
No.
more money.
much happier, and definitely I guess the sense of responsibility for me, which I guess when I look back at my childhood and everything else I took those roles on, that's what helped fulfill me. And just the things that the cops here, I'm looking at the amount of education you have, but the amount of stuff and training they had to do and be responsible for all this, getting paid minimal compared to what I was getting paid, was just, I didn't get it. Most of them had 2 to 3 jobs to be able to keep things afloat.
So tell me a little bit about when you start with Shelley PD. How big is that department?
That at that time only had 7 officers, a chief and 7.
Okay,
So actually, chief and 6, 7, and
okay.
some reserves.
Okay, so when you start as a reserve, what's your training? What are you getting?
I had no training when I started. I was actually knew nothing. So what's nice is a gentleman named Mike Kernut, who started in Shelley there and was came into the job a little bit like me. He came from a guard from the Idaho National Lab. He took me in and said, "You need to buy a level 3 vest, a level 3 holster." I'm like, "I don't know what you're freaking talking about." So you're learning the whole lingo, right? It's all different. And that's what, to me, I learned about communication is when you start using the acronyms, and trust me, the INO is full of acronyms. Idaho National Lab and all the other facilities have acronyms. So they start using the lingo. I didn't know what it meant. So I had to learn what a level 3 holster was and a level 3 vest to make sure I'm safe. And then basically they put me through what's called a level 2 background. So I have to have some procedural law and go do some ride along, handle some calls. And there's a short FTO for that. And then you get to ride with them and help out on calls. You're more the backup. But then I really like this. So I want to see if I can become a level 1 FTO, take a car by myself. So at that time, Idaho State University law enforcement program had a level 1 reserve program that I joined. So basically they send the chief tests and lecture materials. I get to do them or review them on a weekly basis and then take these tests that the chief hands out. They get graded. And then I went to post with my other classmates from all over the state for a week and had to go through just like a whopping week and do practical exercises for traffic stops and things like that. And that's how you get your level 1 reserve. That's how I did it anyway. And then you come back and you do another FTO where you take in your car and you do the same FTO a full-time patrol guy does. So it takes you a lot longer because you're only doing it every so often, but you're doing the same FTO program they did.
Okay, so you're actually riding around with somebody for
Yeah.
how long would you say?
A year and a half.
Okay, so a significant amount of time then.
Yep.
Okay, and then during that time, what about firearms training for a reserve? Are you going out and shooting with the department?
Yes. Yeah. When they qualify, we qualify.
Okay.
So I had to buy my own handgun because that's how it worked back then.
Any requirements of what type of handgun?
Yes. Back then we carried a Smith & Wesson 6906. So the first pull was a double action. There's only one guy on that agency he actually bought whatever model the Smith & Wesson 6906. That's a double action only. He loved that. And we all hated that first round because it's just, and then everything else after that's a single, single action. And it was the 6906, if you guys look them up, it's a smaller gun. It's more made for detectives. It's not really a patrol gun. All metal. It was not compared to that when we switched over to Glocks, which was much better. Somehow somebody let the chief test some guns and he shot the Glock 22 really well. So we were shooting 40 cals Glocks when we transitioned. And so was Bingham County at that time.
Okay.
So
you go from being a chemical engineer.
Yep.
Then you're going to reserve officer. You're finally on patrol. Can you remember that first day on patrol by yourself?
Not so much in Shelley because it wasn't drastically different for me because I'd come down and work. Yes and no, I do because it was March and I know it was right after I had surgery on my shoulder. And I'm thinking, well, okay. I set a goal. It took a while to get here. I'm happier. This is going to be good for me. Mm-hmm. I like it. So yeah, I kind of remember that day, but in terms of the actual work environment, it wasn't anything drastically different because I already been working, just not alone.
Yeah.
So the only difference to me now was I was by myself a lot.
Yeah. So
a lot more.
Probably a lot less nervousness because you'd already been doing this.
Yeah. A lot less nervousness. The only difference was there's nobody there to ask questions. So my first one was day shift. So working with me and the chief a lot. Then I got into doing graveyards. So there's nobody else there. In Shelley, it's halfway between Idaho Falls and Blackfoot. So you have 17 miles from Idaho Falls to help. And then depending if the North residents up there, you're another 20 miles away to Blackfoot. So you're truly by yourself. So what I liked about working for Shelley, you took a call from start to finish. So if it was a burglary or a theft, it became yours. There was no detective division. So when you came back to work, you started working it. So one, I learned how to talk to people because you're by yourself. So you get past, you got to go do it. You suck it up and go, okay, going to be a little nervous in some of these calls. You ask for backup. Sometimes you can only wait so long, especially on the domestics. You got to do what you got to go do. And then being able to write the cases and work on it, that's what I really like. So that's what made me start kicking off again more. I like this part of solving the cases, being the detective part on doing that. That's also when domestic violence became more of the officers get to arrest. It was back in the days, right about the transition time when if the victim didn't say they wanted to arrest, you couldn't. Now it came to you get the elements of the crime, and if you could arrest, you would arrest. So, and I don't know how many domestic violence classes they took, quite a lot in that time frame. And even that has changed drastically now to when you look at strangulation and what we know about that. And I look back at the cases there, like a lot of stuff was missed, but just due to lack of education in how things progressed. So I enjoyed that. I did want to become a detective, so unbeknownst to my chief, sorry, Alan, I applied to both Bonneville County and Idaho Falls, and got an interview with both. And at that time, Bonneville County called, and they were going to hire 5, then they wanted to hire 4. And I had a call like 6 months later saying, "Are you still interested?" I went, "Yep." And actually, I was sitting in a an instructor development class, sitting up in Idaho Falls with Idaho Falls cops, Bonneville County cops, and a couple others. And they actually took a bet on if I was going to work for Idaho Falls or Bonneville. Bonneville already offered me the job, and I'm sitting there. And somebody came in and said, "The chief wants to talk to you." So I got pulled out of class to go talk to the chief. And they were literally taking bets on which agency I would work for. the city has always paid more because the city versus the county. I've always preferred, even though I've worked for a city, I like the county atmosphere better because it's got a wider variety of things you can do. You can go work the backcountry. You can be a school resource officer. You're more by yourself. I don't know. I kind of like being able to just go where I want to go and give a little more space. And then I think you could advance your career a little faster within the sheriff's office and more room. And it felt more for me. I did some ride-alongs more and knew the guys in both agencies, and I just felt closer knit to the county.
Okay.
So I chose the county.
And
plus, I gave my word. One thing.
Yeah.
Oh, one other one for that. I shouldn't do that. Sid Poole. When I went in there and said, Sid, I have a question, Lieutenant Poole. He remembered me from 6 months prior. Going, yeah, Karl, what do you need? I'm like, I was shocked that he remembered my name. I tell him this story to this day. He's like, you're one of the reasons I decided to stay with Bonneville County, because you remembered me. You took the time out of your day when I just showed up out of the blue. Like, I had a bunch of questions because the city just offered me a job. Oh, come again. And we had those discussions, and that helped solidify for me. I got to work for Bonneville County.
How old were you when you started with Bonneville?
I was 43.
Okay, so 43, and we talked a little bit about
Actually,
this.
45 for Bonneville. So full-time 43.
Okay.
I went to post a year earlier as a part-timer for Shelley at the age of 42. I was not the oldest person in my class, even though I thought I was. There was one person older than me, but I was the oldest person in my class.
Okay. Typically, the reason I ask is typically with a sheriff's office, especially one with the jail, you got to start off in the jail.
Yep.
But that's not what happened with you. Why not?
At that time, Bonneville County was taking people with no experience and out of the jail. They were mixing and matching. So at that time, Bonneville County, you had to spend 5 years in the jail before you come out to the road. We were losing some people to the city because of that, because the good guys, I shouldn't say the good guys, people who got a little impatient, the city would scap them up within 2 years. At that time frame, you did not have to start in the jail for Bonneville County, unlike, say, Ada County, Twin Falls. Some other agencies I kind of looked at and went, I'm not going to start in the jail. I'm 43. I'm not going to start in the jail. I want patrol. And I eventually, in my head, I wanted to be a detective. I wanted to be able, at least in my head, to use my engineering skills, some of my science background. I like the forensics shows on TV. They fascinated me because of the science, and try to build that into my daily job and achieve it. So, we're detectives. So,
was it always so? Obviously, the goal was always to become a detective. Did you know what kind of detective you wanted to be?
I knew here there was no specialization. So basically, it's not like New York City or the bigger agencies back east that you got homicide division, narcotics division, people's crime division, SVU, for example, or property crime. We don't have that. The divisions here, when I went into detectives, it was only 6 people total and the sergeant. And Idaho Falls was a little bigger than that, but no real specialization because you're on call. Mm-hmm. And back then I was on call once a week. So you have to know how to handle homicide, a sexual assault, a DV, a property crime, everything from start to finish, and the warrants on all those. So it made you well-rounded. And I think when I started, I remember getting compliments of my reports because I came from Shelley where you handle things from start to finish. So at least in my mind, I knew what needed to be reports for the elements. And handling a bank, let's say a check, back then a bad check, that was a fairly easy case. You go to the bank, does this individual have? And if the bank person told you, yeah, you solved the crime. You know, what was so hard about that? You just have to go into a bank and ask some people the right questions and ask it in such a way you get your information and the crime solved. And you go, hey, did you? Yeah. So then you put in for a warrant. You know, that wasn't rocket science to me. It's like you just have to do it. And a lot of people hated doing those. So when I went and did the property crimes, I was always asking those extra questions. I might have been one of the ones maybe doing a little more fingerprinting because I wanted to play with it because we got fingerprint kits and do that just to see if I would get better at it.
Did you start off as you get into the detectives bureau. We're just going to call it detectives unit.
Yep.
So you have 6 guys that you start off. Do they go, hey, we don't have anybody that really specializes in this. You have to be well-rounded, but can you start working on this?
In a weird way, yes. I kind of there was a person in there that was really good at sex crimes, and that for some reason, based on some things in my past, I was interested in working sex crimes. And I asked to have the sex crime load.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I had the domestic violence load because I replaced that detective. So at that time, you had every DV case that came in, you at least looked at it, see if there needed to be any follow up. And then I asked for the sex crimes on top of that when that person left. So I had DVs and sex crimes. And then that got to be where that was just too much. It was pretty much me and one other person occasionally doing that, and just the amount of crimes. And I can tell you stuff when I became the detective sergeant, how I saw that grow. And I know right when I left, there was 3 people handling just the sex crimes. And the other 4 were handling property crimes, more or less. You have to know everything, but I asked for those 2 things.
So mentally though, that seems like a lot of guys that I talk to don't like those. You kind of gravitated to those. It didn't seem to bother you mentally. Why not? How did you deal with that?
I guess mostly because of some things that happened in my past, and talking with those individuals that I knew in my past and how they dealt with certain things, and can I help them? And I could show empathy because, again, with my past situation, I was helping with those situations. So I felt more for those victims and was able to at least talk. And I think I always got feedback that sounded like, I cared.
Mm-hmm.
I think I did. I tried to. And working. Plus, there was somebody to chase. It's not like a property crime where half the time, yeah, there's back in the day, there's no cameras, there's nothing. Something was taken. So you look through the newspaper, you go look in the pawn shops. But this usually had a suspect.
Yeah.
A lot of times named, because in Idaho Falls, a lot at that time, the sexual assaults, it's not by a stranger, it's by somebody they knew. Or, as a lot of them are, it's family. So even handling the kid ones, those were a little tougher. But when I got to know the domestic violence and group at the time, now they're domestic violence and sexual assault group, and got into them and how forensic interviewing went, that actually improved my interviewing skills too, because you started to get into trauma-based interviewing. And you think about everything you're dealing with, even the home thefts, it's a trauma to that person. So when you listen to their stories, right, they're all over the place. There's no clear linear thinking a lot of times. So I learned how to ask different questions to get more facts out of people and take the time and learn that. So for me to be able to just help them, get them through the right steps, trying to show I cared and going through that, and then working at that time, the prosecutors that work in those crimes, I really liked those prosecutors. For us, person working the sex crimes is usually the number 2 person in the prosecutor's office. So getting to know them and working more as a team, and then coming up when I started to get into the MDT part of it, which everybody should know.
Would you and explain MDT? What is that?
Multidisciplinary team, which basically for adults, there's what's called a SART team, sexual assault response team. With kids, it's called an MDT team,
Okay.
Multidisciplinary team. And by statute, you have to meet for kid sexual assault crimes or child abuse crimes. And we met about twice a week for a while, and then it was every other week. But you meet, so you get to know the advocates, you get to know CPS people, you get to know the DPSAC people, you get to know the SANE nurses, the SAFE nurses, same thing. One's for adults, one, and now it's SANE A, SANE P's, adults and kids, and the prosecutors better. So I like the fact that also being detective, you learn what the prosecutors wanted and what they needed and what they felt was the case. So I think I learned a lot from that part, and I just gravitated that because it's like childhood or childhood to young adult experiences just kind of drew me into trying to it fit better for my psyche, I guess, and showing empathy. So, and somebody to chase, for
So
lack of better words.
before I ask you, so like you had some homicides that you worked on, but and I know the answer to this based on what we already talked about, but tell me how your previous education, the chemical engineering, tell me how that essentially made you a better detective.
Yeah. So especially when I started in as a detective, I learned that now there's all these forensic magazines. So I started reading all of those. But when I went to specifically the homicide scenes, there's the blood spatter. Like, oh, this is cool. This is science. Um, you got the blood spatter. That's cosine angle, a cosine effect for stringing it. Back then, you strung things out. Actually, used the string method. When you go to those classes, you look at the bullet trajectory. That's another cosine angle effect, really, when you look at bullet trajectory. You got to look at the size of the hole, the tail of the hole, tails of the blood spatter. That's just all science and putting a puzzle together. So when you look at the fingerprints that you can lift, the DNA you can get, the blood spatter, and the individual himself, unfortunately, is part of the scene. And looking at the body and being able to put all that together, to me, that's a puzzle. That's engineering. That's what you did as an engineer. You have these problems, you have to solve them, and you pull pieces from here, here, and there from a very well-rounded education. So taking all these classes just got me better, well-rounded, and going to a scene like that. Okay, I didn't think, from my perspective, I wasn't thinking as a cop. Honestly, I was thinking as an engineer from my perspective, because I'm like, how does that fit to that, to that, to that, to that? And then trying to put all those together.
Yeah, and the same thing even with your homicide investigation. You were
Yep.
talking about how you like to analyze the blood splatter
Yep.
from an engineering standpoint.
Right. And then if you look at the sexual assault components of that too, there came in to be the sexual assault kits initiative on that, and where you have the DNA pulled and learning that the nurses are key, in my opinion, to sexual assaults. The second interview, if you will, maybe a crappy way of saying it, but the same nurses do ask them roughly the same things you do. A lot of times they get more information than you do. So that's more important to me. The kid tells you had sex or you didn't have sex. It's did they have tears, did they have bruising, and all that. And in the science as that goes along, as I learned about, bruising was what I thought bruising was. You know, the yellow's old, brown's older. That's all bullshit when it got said and done, when you start going to classes as it progressed. And it depends on the individual, color of the skin, a lot of things go into that. So you can't base things on that. And looking about petechiae, tachnoria across the eyes, like, wow, fascinating. This is all science to me. And then how the body works and how it reacts to trauma and how it can recover from trauma really quick. When you start looking at older cases that are reported months later, years later, you might have nothing physical to get. It's all going to be based on your interviewing. So, and then actually talking to one of our pathologists, he said he helped put together the sexual assault kit. So, like, wow, didn't know that. So back in the day, when I look at some of our cold cases, when it was just the swab and then looking for amylase, an enzyme, versus now you're looking for the actual sperm cell or DNA, and how it's progressed, to me, that's all science, and I'll just eat that up.
Yeah.
So that's just
Okay.
what I like.
Hey, you had at least one case that we discussed kind of affected you a little bit. Well, not a little bit, a lot. And I think it's because of your empathetic nature. Can you talk a little bit about the woman in the train?
Yeah. So when I was fairly new in Chile, I was working, I think it was a Saturday day shift, but I was by myself. It was a day shift. And I just had a bad crash, and I'm working that in the office, and two ladies knock on the door, and then it's closed because you're by yourself. Answer the door, and they say, hey, this girl that keeps running out in the street. I think she's trying to get hit by cars. So I stop what I do, and I go there. She's actually in like a group home setting where she can leave the facility. She's not locked down or anything. And I just started talking to her, and I wind up learning, and it's kind of like an anniversary date of her friend. She didn't expand enough to me to realize that was the day her friend died. I learned that after the fact, unfortunately. But she kept running out and said, yeah, I'm just having a rough time and trying to deal. So we talked for a while, found some staff members. And I said, she's having a hard time. Can you help with that? And I basically had her look at me in the eye and said, you promised me you'll just hang out with them and stay here and talk to them and get some help. Yes, shook my hand. And it did a promise. And about a half hour later, an hour later, there was an emergency call. The tones actually went off and wound up, she ran in front of a train and was dead. And I felt crappy on that one because when I look back, what I know now about mental health and what you can do in terms of PC holds, anything like that, could have helped more and just learn from that. And then what my lesson from that, unfortunately, was everybody else I took when I went for mental health calls. I was empathetic. I listened. But if they said anything geared toward, yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do, or I might hurt myself, it was an automatic, well, we have two options. You can come with me and go to the hospital voluntarily. We can go in the ambulance voluntarily, or unfortunately, I'm going to take you under. So talk them into going to the hospital and getting evaluated and going through the process of that and learn a lot. And then having to call the parents were in a totally different state. And then learning more about, well, that happened to be an anniversary date. So learning to ask a lot more questions on that. And that one still bugs me to this day.
Yeah, so let me answer that. So that happened pretty early on in your career, and I'm sure you see traumatic events as you progress through your career. Did you learn a better way to deal with situations like that emotionally, or did you just have ways to kind of compartmentalize it?
Compartmentalize and deal with it a better way. And I'm also going to say for me, because you have to look at my education, I like learning. Continual learner is how I'll try to explain it. Read books and as I learned more about mental health, one is she decided. So I learned in process that it didn't matter what I did that day, unless she went there. She would have done it maybe a different day, maybe, who knows. But I learned to, in my head, go, well, they've decided, and there's not much. There's some things you can do. I know people are going to fight back on that one a little bit. But for me, when I went through it, just my education level on how mental health works and what you can do to help prevent it and things you can do progressed enough to actually then start me into go to crisis, become a CIT officer, crisis intervention training officer, and work myself to a hostage negotiator training, because that all to me is roughly the same thing. It's all learning to talk, getting them to get their feelings out, what's going through their head, trying to resolve an issue, see what help you can get them, where you can get them, learning more about resources. So for me, I guess getting taught how mental health can manifest itself in things like that helps me, and then deal with that. It still bothers me because I didn't know all that at the time. It's kind of like, if you had a do-over, like, okay, that would have totally been different.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me, you just mentioned this. Tell me, you worked as a crisis intervention and a hostage negotiator. Tell me what those jobs entailed.
Okay. Well, first I'm going to go back to, I became a CIT officer because that was one of the up-and-coming things, and you realize that a lot of the people we're dealing with are in some kind of mental health crisis or just crisis. So it's a different way to talk to them and make sure, do you have counselor? And learning to, honestly, you can say, do you have a mental health diagnosis? Because if they do, most of them are willing to share and go, yep, I'm on this med, and it makes me feel like crap, so I'm off of it right now. Okay, big clue. All right, so it helps. So they'll spit it out. So doing that, and then I was on the SWAT team, and then when I turned 50, I'm like, well, maybe it's time to get off the SWAT team. And our negotiator at the time got off the SWAT team, so I volunteered. So you're still part of the SWAT team. And I think there was that unique part that now, if I say we're going to the 1-2 corner, 3-4 corner, and they're talking about it, I know what they're talking about. I know what the SWAT strategies are. So as I'm talking to people, I know what the SWAT team's doing because we're listening to the radio. But becoming the negotiator to me was the CIT. And when I went to the HNT classes, then I went on like, yeah, it's roughly the same thing. Mental health components are in there. Vet components are in there. Medical components are in there. And just being able to talk and try to resolve a bigger issue. Most of ours, I can't think of any that actually had a hostage. It was more self-barricaded, drunk, high, did something stupid, and then now they're just staying in a room and, not so much with family or anybody else like that, and then trying to get them to come out peacefully.
Do you think it helped at that point? You're 50, you become this negotiator. You think age helps out?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think life experience definitely makes a difference. I will say this. There's a difference between the youth that are coming in now and my generation, who we've experienced different things. We were taught differently. Shouldn't word it that way, but we're taught differently. And I had a lot more life experience. So if you look at where I grew up, a lot more cultural diversity where I grew up, and different states, different education level, and did a lot more than, so to me, I could talk. I have to say, though, with the other negotiators, there were some that were better, and you knew when, okay, she's starting to talk about horses. I don't know crap about horses, but my kids ride. But then there was a lady who was an equestrian on her team. Like, oh, you know what? We're going to switch. So you two can have that. There was one vet that would not talk to us whatsoever because we weren't vets. So the bottom line is we called some people, got another vet out there, and they say not to do this, but that was the best thing we could do. Got another vet out there. We listened to what he was saying, and it was a vet-to-vet talk. He said, and he got him out. So, so having that experience helped that connection. I think having been through 2 divorces, having to deal with child custody issues, which unfortunately a lot of the calls you go to somewhat geared that way a lot. So I can have that. I've been through that. So let's talk about where you're going through, what I've been through, and, and see where our connection is. That helped me to do a lot of that too.
As time went by, did you find it more difficult to negotiate or deal? And maybe you didn't because you had that experience, but did you find it more difficult to relate to this social media generation?
Yes. I personally, I did, because half the time we're late to letter calls. If they were younger, they're texting us when we're doing the negotiation. And there's so much, in my opinion, loss of what are you trying to say in a written word versus the body language. When you're face to face to somebody versus even listening to their verbal tones, versus the text message. What did you really, there's double entendre a lot to me in text. And then they're texting everybody else but us. So you can't talk to them. It was really hard they're talking to the family, and the family like, come out, or you screwed up. And it was just bad. And a lot of times they knew more what was going on with the person we're trying to get out than that. So for me, it's frustrating. I'm like, just talk to me. Let's stop texting and let's just talk. So when I became the negotiator team lead, we had guys that were younger. And so that was another, okay, you're going to do that, because I think I knew where my limits were, and go like, you'll do better. I'll just listen and try to go between. So.
But it seems like even if you had a younger officer trying to relate to these people, they're on their phone so much that there's no communication skills.
No. I personally agree with that. There's lots of that. So I will say I struggled interviewing teenagers, because they're like, yeah, I said, did you talk to him? And they went, no, I didn't talk to him. And like, I text them. Like, that to me is the same thing. All right, young man, that's the same thing. You had some kind of communication with them. So I was just trying to get, I guess, past that language barrier of doing that. So for me, yeah, the face to face. And honestly, to me, to be a good detective, you need to get out from behind your desk, go to the person's house, bring them in. They're not going to come to you. You know what? Go to them.
Yeah.
And you got to flex your hours a lot. It's not a 9 to 5 job. It is not a 9 to 5 job. The good detectives are not doing that. Person wants me on Saturday. Guess what, family? I got to go do this. Certain times you try to work around that, but that's when they can meet. You go meet. And then this, like we're doing, where it can read the body language, do that, look at the tone, get a feel, much, much better. That texting doesn't. I will say this though.
Okay.
Social media has solved some of our hardest homicides because the kid was 19, never did anything wrong, ever, and wound up beating, I'll use step grandma to death with a baseball bat because she kind of stole grandpa away from him. And basically he told 2 other people. One was via text. The other one, they're telling face to face. So by that, and then that got shared a little bit. And then you look at some of the other ones, they just posted everywhere. Hey, this tool set's for sale. It's got the markings, so sometimes I'm going like, how stupid can you be? You just post everything you just did on there, and then you show that to the jury, and you're like, So it's been helpful.
Yeah.
Other times when you're negotiating, it's not so much. So.
Okay, so at some point you decide that you start promoting.
Yep.
Why?
That's a good question, actually. When I look back at the sergeant testing,
Mm-hmm.
I was here. That was 03. I got promoted in 07. So I started full time in 03 and made sergeant in 07. I basically kind of looked at the testing and went, why not? It's weird. It's just like, why not? But there was many people in front of me that I thought were better. There were 6 of us that tested for sergeant up front. And all I said was, you're going to have an older sergeant, 43 at the time, I think. How old was I then? 47? Something in there. Like, you're going to have somebody that has a little more maturity and a little more emotional check, IQ, things like that. So I just thought I would do that with no, and if I didn't get it, I would stay in detectives my career. That's what was going through my head. So I just, all right, see what it is. And then I got offered the job. It was one of those where I also said, to be frank, I said, there's somebody ahead of me that I think is better. And I got told, this might not ever come along if you're catching the football. So I went, okay, I'll take it. So I got promoted and went into patrol. I have a very, very strong bias that if you're going to promote to sergeant, if you came out of detectives, you are a better sergeant. And the reason is, you've worked with the prosecutor's office, worked with the judges, you've worked with the advocate groups, so you know what everybody kind of wants, you know what they're looking for, you know what's important in reports, you know how to write warrants, all right, that's a mailbox vandalism. Don't spend forever on that. It is what it is. And then you have this case. We need to spend time on this case and learning how to write reports, make sure you're meeting the elements. I think I was a much better sergeant from coming out of there and knowing that and teaching the guys that. Some of them didn't like it because their reports had to be much more detailed.
Yeah.
My biggest one, if it's not on paper, it didn't happen.
Right.
You say you did that. Where is this? You didn't say it happened. And trust me, if you ever go to court 6 months from now, you say you did it. If it's not there, you're going to get eaten up. So make sure, even if you don't think it's that important, but in those bigger cases, you got to put all in it. So I feel you become a better patrol sergeant from doing that. So
once you started to promote, was there a sense of, I'm going to try and get as high as I can, or was it, no, I'm just going to promote to this level?
No, when I became sergeant, and then I started working up. I did have thoughts of my career goal was to be a lieutenant.
Okay.
No higher.
Why stop there?
Why stop there? There's two reasons for stop there in Bonneville County. One is it's a crappy reason, but a captain is salaried and I'm hourly. So I actually make more money. So, and our lieutenants, I know bigger agencies, Ada, I think, in Boise, maybe lieutenants are salaried. IF, they just did that. So a lot of people don't want to rank up because when you're trying to get, especially in the state of Idaho, get your highest your highest 42.
Yeah.
You just do some overtime and rank that up. And if you promote and you're a lieutenant, you're not going to make as much. So I did think about lieutenant. I tested for lieutenant 3 times before I made it. 4 times, I think. 4th time was the time I made it. So one was just to get in the process and just, I felt like there was, if you want to help develop how the agency runs and where you want it to go and issues you see, you need to be in that position to help fix it. And I also thought I had, and I don't know what the guys actually thought, in here to go, I'll listen to you. I'm not going to say no. If you got a good idea, let's bring it up. Let's try to get it to work. So I tried a few times and then made it toward the end of my career, not knowing, but I was 59, 60 when I made lieutenant. Could have retired then. That's about when my rule 80 reached, but I figured I was going to go 4 more years because I also had a divorce right in that time, which bad time to get divorced, totally my fault. And I was all set, but now I was like, well, now I need insurance and things like that. So yeah, I need to stay at least till 62 to be able to collect my Social Security. So at least that was going through my head. I got to stay till 62 so I collect Social Security and be able to make it between my pensions and everything else I have. So that was one of it. So sergeant to lieutenant took a little while, but I moved in different sergeant positions. And what I liked about that, actually, as much as when I made wants and warrants lieutenant, I got put in that slot. I didn't want it. It's transporting the prisoners around. It's over the sex offenders, and it was over driver's license and things like that. It wound up actually being a fun job because you get to arrest them and you get the paragraph report. I went and found somebody at his house. I told him he was under arrest for his warrant. I put handcuffs on him, double locked him, put him back to court, transport to jail. It's kind of a fun job because you get to chase the fugitives and very short paper. So it was fun learning about the sex offenders and keeping track of that. Gave me a bigger idea of, there was like, at that time, over 300 or so in Bonneville County to help keep track of and do all that. And make, if they screw up or that's your function to go do that. Being over a driver's license was interesting because they're non-commissioned and more just making sure they handle the money right, get that right. And everything's run by the state, really, how that runs. So just learning that perspective. So then chose Ammon Sergeant next because I felt it was a little more responsibility. Ammon is a contract city for Bonneville County. They pay us some good money to contract with them, and they get a lot of services for us. They get a SWAT team, a dive team, a bomb squad, full detective division when they'd be out of being a contract city. So by being that, I think it gave me a little more responsibility. At that time, also became the FTO sergeant. Those are 2 things that was really, really tough to give up to become the detective sergeant. One, I think as the FTO sergeant, you're shaping your office. You're shaping the sheriff's office. I always had that conversation with the kids coming in. Here's our expectations. Here's my expectations. I'll help you. Just let's have honest conversations. Make sure you've talked to your spouse, because I've seen that go south. Somebody was halfway through. Spouse said, didn't think it was going to be like this. Done. Just make sure you're having those conversations and do that. And then with the FTOs, you are shaping your organization. So to me, that's hugely important job and setting the character of your office.
Well, let me ask you about that. Your leadership style. You have this chemical engineering thing, very analytical.
Yeah.
Where do you think give me an idea, if I was working for you, or if I went and interviewed somebody that was working for you, how would they describe your leadership style? Or what do you think it was?
Probably analytical.
Okay.
When you do the DISC profile, though, you've heard of the DISC profile: dominant, influencer, social, and compliant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big time C. It's interesting. I'm not a D. I'm a C. But when I need to be, I can become a D. So I think I was all in there. As a D or a C. I was very not much an I or an S, because I'm more of a straight to the point. I tried not to beat around the bush, but I think I did lean on other people that I thought were more competent than some others, per se, because I know they could do the job. I could just say, go do this. And they would take that extra step. You know why? Because they were like me in some aspects. So it was hard to get past I always felt I would take that next step. Well, if something came up and like the victim had another crime happen to her, you can't just let that go away. You got to investigate it. Another person came into play. You can't just drop it. You got to take those extra steps. So I always tried to do that. I did learn, I guess, the hard way, that there's also the line that's the job, and I've learned you can't force people or sometimes even influence people to go up or down. I think some people might disagree with that, but my leadership style probably didn't let me help do that. I tried to show how important it was, but I also would explain things very logical. I always wanted to be told why. So as much as possible, I told the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. So they have the why. And I think this generation is more, why are we doing it that way? And occasionally they go, why are we doing it? Like, you know what? I don't really know. It's been that way. Let's look into it. I had a good assistant, secretary is the wrong word, administrative assistant, help me. And she was like, why are we? I'm like, I don't know. That's always how my past one did it. She said, well, here is what I think's better. And we looked into it. It's better. So if you would come to me with a solution, let's do it. There's nothing saying you can't. So I do think sometimes I was harder on them because I am very self-critical. I think, unfortunately, sometimes that came out to me onto them, going like, you could have maybe done this. Or sometime one of my bad habits, and I'll be honest about this, was it's hard to let them do it because you do it your way, but you got to let them do it their way because it works for them. That was a big lesson when to become sergeant. And I know that because when I went through my FT, I was like, I didn't like that. I like this. And for me, especially as the sergeant, like, oof. All right, but it got the job done. So it took a while to get that. And their writing styles, totally different.
Yeah.
So learning to let that go. But when it's detectives, I always had that higher expectation. We were here for the victim. We're here. It's not a 24/7 job. I mean, sorry, it is a 24/7 job. And I expect you to get out from behind your desk and do that. So.
Yeah, I think it's an really interesting point you brought up about this new generation. Why? But conversely, I think it is important to tell them why.
Yes.
Right. So.
No, I had a lot of that when I worked at the Idaho. Like, why are we doing this? And I never got the answers, which is frustrating. If you just explain it to me, I'll help you get to where we need to go.
Yeah.
So I always felt I tried to go here, and this is why, and help me get there.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, before I ask you the last two questions I always ask, can you tell me the story? Okay, so first of all, audience, coffee time, Carlos Chelvaria, Raisin Man. I'm just going to refer to that as he's going to tell the story. Can you tell me the story about the murder with the fly?
The fly, yeah. Actually, I was doing overtime that day, doing dam duty, as we call it. We're watching a dam, make sure it doesn't get blown up. That's a whole different story. That's BLM duty. You get paid to look at dams or terrorism watch. So good overtime. Sometimes you get caught up paperwork. So sitting on a dam, and I hear the patrol guys go, Yeah, we just went to a house, and the neighbors, they haven't seen her for 3 weeks, and the front door was open, and when they opened it, they could just smell this horrific smell. And then when we walked around the back door was kicked in, and there is flies everywhere in that house. So I went, I'm heading there. Don't go in yet. Just wait. And I show up. My lieutenant shows up. We do an outside periphery of the house first and do that. And you look, and there's flies on like every freaking window. I can't count how many flies are in that. So we did wear masks, booties, and gloves. And I, unfortunately, as being a detective sergeant who has to go into the scenes, you'd think I'd do better than this. I don't do smells really well. So first off, I'm wearing the mask to try to, one, keep the flies out, but I'm also starting to gag a lot because the smell, she's there for 3 weeks. She was liquid pretty much. There's not much left. And there's maggots all in her. And yeah, we do the coarse jokes to help deal with it. But then I pulled my mask down because I'm starting to gag and I swallowed a fly. So I got teased from there on in. And there's a book, something like somebody swallowed a fly and was given the book. So yeah, but I actually swallowed one of those nice flies while we were gathering the maggots. That was yeah.
So kind of along with, the whole smell thing and all that other thing you're talking about, we discussed this and you kind of mentioned this. So even as you're doing cold cases now, your memory can still kick back because you had mentioned that these smells come back from old cases.
Yeah. So I found that interesting because it's also what you talk about when you do trauma-based interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
What did you smell? What did you hear? And you think about your memories. They're usually associated with a smell, a sound, a sight sometimes. So I'm looking at one of the old cold cases which had a really nasty inside scene. There's blood everywhere, and you could tell they've been dead for a couple days. And what's this particular case we're talking about just came back. I could smell her. I could smell the house. I could feel the texture, when you have the iron in the blood that you're eating when you're inside the house, because a lot of times we did not have masks for a while. So that just all flooded back when I was watching these pictures. And I'm like, wow, that's just fascinating. I could taste it and needed a shower. It's just really bizarre to me that I had the taste and I had to go get something that kind of take the taste out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 last questions I always ask.
Okay.
Did law enforcement affect your family?
Yes and no. And it's hard to say. So one, I'm going to say this. In my opinion, both of my exes were really, really supportive of this. So, or I wouldn't be here. Because my ex told me about reserve programs. That's what got me hooked into okay, I really like this job. Something I potentially would like to do full time. But I would have stayed reserving the whole time if my second wife said no. I would have stayed reserving because that is what I like doing. So both wives supportive. The kids were young, so maybe they got used to, not being there on certain days of the week. And I think my current girlfriend and my wife and the kids were generally showed pride in what I did and backed me for what I did. So if I, wasn't home with that. But what was nice with Bonneville County, if the game or stuff's within your beat, and as a sergeant, I would tell them that too. If your kid's playing soccer, just listen to the radio. You can go watch part of the game. You're there.
Mm-hmm.
You're supporting the community. I don't see where it's an issue. Go do that. We just don't expect you to hang out there, listen to your calls. So in that way, yes, I missed a few things, missed a few birthdays and that. Yeah, so I think that's true with everybody. But I think I got really lucky that everybody supported. I had 2 stepkids at the time. I think they were very supportive of that too, and doing all that. And then when you say affecting, the biggest thing that threw me for a loop was my daughter became an ISP trooper. And I have to give her, I should say this, I gave her crap a little bit. But Kristen, I wish you talked to me first. I would have probably steered you a little different way. And now what? I am working for ISP. Very weird come about way. And she called me one day out of the blue and said, "Hey, Dad, I just got my polygraph done by Paul Egbert. Paul Egbert's somebody who used to work down here and did polys." I'm like, "Say what? For ISP? Yeah, you could do the test online. You can always do the test online. It's a lot easier than having to wait for the scheduled test, like Bonneville and others at the time we're doing. You have to schedule to come in and do tests." So yeah, I passed that, and then they were doing my poly. I passed it, and I'm gonna go do it. I'm like, "You never said you had an interest in that at all, because she was doing forest fires, wildland forest fires. Really liked your crew and did that." She said, "No, Dad, I always looked up to what you were doing and proud of what you did." And I wrote my letter, and she sent me a letter. So I was shocked that I guess rubbed off to the point that she totally did to me a flip flop. But she likes physical jobs and that, and the cops are physical jobs.
Yeah.
And totally switched and became a trooper. And now she's a detective.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Okay.
In a way where it is.
Okay. Last question for you. So, even though you're still in law enforcement now, can you look back on when you started back in Shelley in 1996 until now? Can you look back and see how, if your attitude toward people and society has changed?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it has.
Okay.
And actually, it's funny when I talked to my daughter, who's a firefighter, you learn that they kind of have the same darker side of humor sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and when I've talked to my girlfriend, and she had her friend come to my retirement party, and one of the things she noticed, who's never been around cops all that much, is we all are highly aware of our surroundings. So she was like surprised, because it's a cop thing, right? They're all in the back of the room. They all have their back to the wall. Say what corner is the safest so they can see the doors and the windows. So yeah, I mean, like if my girlfriend started sitting in that seat, I'm like, "No, you can't. No, that's my seat. I need to see. I can't have my back to the door." Those things. Just being aware of the situations, always, I guess, being more in condition yellow, as they call it, not white, a little bit above. Being aware. Unfortunately, there's some people we deal with over and over and over. The recidivism rate is high for some people, and you go, "Why doesn't a judge help us?" So there's that, and then just having that. Sometimes you get more burnt out, and you need to change, because it will start affecting how you interview or how you do that. And the victims, I think, see that, unfortunately. I think luckily when I was in detectives, it wasn't as much. I think it was harder when I was in patrol, because sometimes it's the same type of call. It's always different. Unlike research, which I thought, it's a different project, but it's the same thing. Every call is a little different. You always have to think a little different. You might have to go from A to Z back to Z. And you would think, for me as an engineer, I'm more of an A, B, C, D, but I can do that. Matter of fact, sometimes people say I got a squirrel brain. I jump too much, but I've been accused of that. So yeah, I usually, unfortunately, have that. I'll go the word judge kind of, "Yeah, I already got you pegged as this," until I start talking to them. So I always got that first opinion, but it's more on the safety side. I'll try to word it that way.
Yeah.
To you until you show me otherwise. So yeah, it's definitely.
Carl, thank you for the interview. Appreciate it.
Can I add one thing? Because I
Absolutely.
never got to do it
Absolutely.
returning. So the one thing is, I would like everybody to stay safe. And if your job is pissing you off, like mine was, change careers. Even if you're a cop and you need to change, look at it. Because I think you'll be happier mentally, and everything else. It's going to help with my home life, helped with me mentally, physically, because I got rid of that extra stress when I was showing up to work pissed all the time. And make sure you take care of yourself mentally, physically, and with your family, because I got to retire. Unfortunately, I know a few have took their own lives, and I knew a few that were killed in the line of duty. I got the blessing of a good career, a good family, and I would like that for everybody else to be able to retire as a whole.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.